Hello, I'm Eric Holdeman, and this is Disaster Zone, a show about emergencies and disasters that can happen anywhere and at any time. Today's show is with Walt Hubbard, the Director of the King County Office of Emergency Management. And Walt, welcome to Disaster Zone.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here.
Really, it's good to be here.
You're really just starting out. Share a little bit about yourself and the King County Office of Emergency Management. What's your background?
Sure.
And then the office itself.
Sure, be happy to. I think the best way to describe this is I'm a Northwest guy. My family's been here for quite a while. Post-World War II is when my grandfather came here, so we've been in Seattle the entire time. Lived in West Seattle and then in the Central District. Went to school at Seattle University and then graduate school at the University of Washington.
So you have web feet.
I know what the climate is like here. I know exactly what to expect here. And then left. Spent 20 years in the military after ROTC at the University of Washington, and came back and ran a pediatric clinic for Children's Hospital, Odessa Brown, in the central area. And then went to work for Paul Schell as his public safety guy after Paul did not get reelected.
And that's City of Seattle.
City of Seattle, yes, thank you. And then after Paul didn't get reelected, worked for the fire chief of Seattle, and then got selected for a position that they had just created over the King County Department of Transportation, the Emergency Preparedness Manager over DOT, or Department of Transportation. And then from there, was asked to provide some interim support at the King County Office of Emergency Management about almost a year ago. So that's been sort of my track record and relationship with Seattle and now King County over the last few years.
Okay, and now you're the permanent director.
That selection was made, I believe, back in September, after a pretty thorough recruitment process, and I've been there formally since, I believe, September.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we were chatting before the show. We didn't really talk about how long we've known one another, but if it goes back to Project Impact days, it'd have to be maybe 14 years, something like that.
I think that's right.
Long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, honestly, you were someone that I had heard about and then met you and had been to a number of meetings that you were at. You also were the person who, when you were in King County, made an outreach to the city of Seattle in a very important training week that we went to, I believe, back in Virginia. And that was an opportunity for me to meet, didn't know it then, but some of the folks that I've been working with in King County. The Director of Department of Transportation, Harold Taniguchi, was one of them, and some of the senior leadership in King County. So we go back a ways.
We do. And it was great having you on that big exercise that we did.
It was helpful for me, too. It was very good to be there.
So about the King County Office of Emergency Management, tell us a little bit about that today.
Yeah, I mean, our office has recently, and I would say in the past year and a half, probably a year and a half, gotten a very clear mandate from the King County Council, and that is focusing more on regional support. And that's what we've been trying to do, is to sort out, to determine what that looks like and what the relationship and the partnership is going to be with the jurisdictions throughout King County. That also means establishing and nurturing relationships with our counties that are adjacent to us. Because as you know, and as I'm sure as many folks listening to your program know, that disasters don't respect boundaries, they don't recognize them, and so this whole partnership is really important. So we've been on a regional mission for the last since the mandate from King County Council, and that's primarily our focus now, to include the other things that you have to do to be prepared and to make sure that the coordination among partners is pretty solid. Okay,
and I know there's always a transition of personnel, but I think you kind of have a youth movement out there with some really talented younger folks now.
Yes, and that's really nice to see. And most folks would feel that with a youthful office that you would lack experience, or that would be sort of a trade-off. I don't think we've done that. I mean, there's been a number of long-term staff members who recently have either elected to retire or moved on to another opportunity. And we've been able to bring in some really, really good talent, some great training experience talent, some training and operations talent. We've got people, the head of our training and operations section, Stephanie Supko, is Coast Guard experience, Katrina experience. We just hired a young man with a great deal of national experience, Jay Esper, in terms of for our training and operations to begin to complement that. We have an office that is fairly young, and we're trying to blend that with some of the experience we have there and their youth and enthusiasm to be able to provide the job and the mission that we've been asked to do.
And what I always see for the youth there, they bring with them, perhaps they're not digital natives, but they certainly have more of an aptitude for all the technology that we have to use today.
That has been a huge benefit for us. Size does matter, but technology has helped us bridge that. And very well that it's really about information and communication and being able to get information out to a number of different stakeholders, hopefully within real time, and hopefully, so everyone has a sort of the same picture. And I think the jump that we have made over the last several years in terms of technology in our digital environment has helped us and will continue to help us in the future. It's a great aid.
All right. King County is really, in Washington State it's big, and in the nation it's really huge. I mean, geographically, I want to say it's about the size of the state of Rhode Island. If it was a state, I think the population would put it close to the top 10, maybe it's the third. I know it's 13th largest county or something like
Correct.
that. So it's really big. How's that size impact how you approach disaster preparedness with these partners you talked about?
Yeah, we've looked at that as just an element of the landscape that we have to deal with, not necessarily as a handicap or something we need to be really anxious about. Because once again, technology has sort of helped us to bridge the distance. We were talking to some of our counterparts in Colorado a few weeks ago. They've been dealing a lot over the summer. They dealt with firefighters and fires quite a bit, forest fires quite a bit, and they had an initial meeting with everyone physically there, and after that, all the updates and the communication was done, through IT mediums. We have a wonderful facility that actually you helped create and build for King County, and I think that is going to serve us well, especially if we have a very long-term event that's going to require some extensive planning down the road. But I think technology has really helped us sort of bridge the gap of geography. And you're right, we're the 13th or 14th largest county. We're very diverse, getting more diverse. Yeah. And each jurisdiction has some very unique characteristics about it that we need to recognize and work with. So technology has been a real aid for us, regardless of the size.
Okay, here's a question that wasn't on the script, but I know you can
That's
answer.
Okay.
We talked about it. But I was thinking about the Regional Communications Emergency Coordination Center that's your hub there for coordinating activities. It's 10 years old now. It's hard to believe. This summer, July, I think, be 10 years old. What are you seeing now that needs to be done, 10 years later, that was cutting edge back there, but now you need to update some systems?
Yeah, it goes back to, I think we've been the victim of where technology has turned over so quickly over the past several years. So if you look at the facility and you look at the apparatus that's in there, and the tools that we have available, great for when it was initially built. We do have some utility now, so it still provides us a benefit. But resources are very tight. They're tight everywhere. We've got to be cognizant of that. If resources were unlimited, we would probably take a look at how we could possibly upgrade the facility, primarily for communication, and in order to be able to give all our stakeholders a common operating picture during an event. Yeah. So great start, great facility. Technology, as everywhere else, has just outraced us a bit.
You think about the average for the people at home. Do you have the same cell phone you used to have? Do you have the same home phone? What's your communications methodology for your computer? Has it changed at all? How are you getting your television signal? All these challenges, that also impacts you. So,
and we also have the E911 center, as you know. The move to more of a digital format, the move to more mobile phones rather than landline phones, that's something, just one example, that we have to be aware of and catch up. So is the facility functional? Absolutely. Do we still have the tools that we need to be able to do the job that we need now? Yes, we do. Would we like to be able to take advantage of some of the new technology coming out? You bet we would.
Well, I hope you are able to do that, because it changes so rapidly. So, when you look at all the hazards that King County has, and for the people and organizations, What keeps you awake at night? That's kind of a phrase people used to ask me sometimes, but what keeps you awake, and what are you more concerned with disaster-wise that we've seen?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Obviously, when you take a look at our historical record here, severe weather and flooding are the two things that really have impacted us. And I think most recently, the last year during the Martin Luther King week, the snow and ice, and especially, I don't know if it was Tuesday or Wednesday, but during the middle of that week, we had this early morning ice event that was really sort of a surprise to everyone.
Yeah.
So flooding and severe weather, we probably, on average, activate maybe half a dozen times a year, and that's primarily for weather. This winter we've been fairly fortunate.
By activate, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, when an event occurs, depending on its severity and what we might forecast as its duration, we always have a duty officer available and on. We will begin to monitor the situation and add more internal staff to be able to monitor the event, to be able to communicate with the folks who are first responders who may be there, stakeholders who are engaged. And if it becomes very complex and we feel that it's going to have some longevity, then we'll begin to bring in assets within King County. So we will begin to activate, meaning we'll begin to monitor that and then add additional staff and capability depending on the complexity and duration of the event.
Okay.
But the one thing that will always keep you up at night is earthquake. I think that even though the Nisqually earthquake some years ago, 10 years ago, or
you probably have 2001, I think. So it's been 12 years ago.
Traumatic as that day was for a number of people, as difficult as it was to make sure you knew where your loved ones were, your family members were. When you take a look at the damage, physical damage, and also from a building and facility, we were fortunate. We were very, very fortunate. So it wasn't that sort of wake up that we needed. I mean, we're always very cognizant of how do we respond and react if we really get hit with a major earthquake that has a direct impact on our infrastructure, safety and security of our residents in King County. So earthquake is the toughest one, and is also, as you know, no notice. I mean, you can get a forecast for weather. You can get a very good forecast, and it's gotten better over the last few years for the potential for flooding. And our road services folks, who are very familiar with every inch of King County, can tell you based on historical knowledge what's going to flood sooner than later. So it's the earthquake, Eric. That's the toughest one.
And what, from a catastrophic disaster, that's perhaps at the top of the list for you. Other areas of the nation that aren't coastal have hurricanes, but you get that forecast. What's unusual about these no-notice, I call them come-as-you-are disasters, like a catastrophic earthquake as opposed to a hurricane? What makes that even harder?
Yeah,
the no-notice part, but what does that mean to you?
I think it puts, when you ask that, a couple things come to mind. It will always put emphasis on personal preparedness, because if that occurs, we know that trying to get support to our residents is going to be difficult. And I think we've seen over the last several years, wherever those events have occurred, that people need to be personally prepared. And there's been a great deal of work, as you know, on personal preparedness, and now, making sure that your plans account for your children, elderly. A number of families are taking care of older parents. And also, I think the other part of that is no notice. It will happen. How do we react? The strength of what we plan and our relationships before that is going to be important in terms of our ability to respond. But more importantly, if it's catastrophic, how do we begin to bring the government and private and nonprofit organizations together to be able to work together to be able to dig out of this? I think the experience in Mississippi with Katrina and Rita, and the lessons learned that we've heard from the governor of Mississippi, and that working together to try to organize that. I mean, one lessons learned that we've had from a catastrophic is you need to have these relationships in place before. You may not be able to have all the plans because you don't know it's going to be no notice and how it's going to impact, but you need to have the relationships built. So partnership is huge for us. It's very important.
All right. One last one here before we do take a break. And, you have cities and you have counties and you have states and you have the federal government. Everybody generally knows FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. How's the county fit in to that stratus of, government organizations?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The federal government will work through the states, and the states will work through the counties. And with home rule in Washington State, jurisdictions or cities do have direct access to the state. But there's a structure here that actually works and has been timed, it's tested over time. I think what we provide in that whole network is the conduit to the state and also to federal assets. And also I think the other thing that we provide is an opportunity to take a look at what tools are not available, what services may not be available, what programs may not be available within each jurisdiction, and how we may be able to fill the gap there. For instance, we've done a great deal of work on having a much more global and far-reaching training program. So it now encompasses a number of the needs that other jurisdictions, the cities within King County may need. And we've had great success in bringing in some federal assets to be able to teach some very important training. I know that we will probably talk a bit about Boston later on, but yesterday for 2 days we brought some assets in to talk about what happens if a stadium or sports event is compromised and there's an event there. We've had some pretty large organizations within the city and the county participate. So I think we provide that network to be able to support the jurisdictions. And also, if you're talking about a presidential declaration, organizing to make sure that we have the damage that has occurred to us organized and submitted through the proper channels, so King County and our jurisdictions have an opportunity to receive reimbursement, so we can kind of get back to steady state after a catastrophic. So those and a few other things that we do: hazard mitigation, communication and information countywide, and also with our adjacent counties. So I think that's the role that we play, and we're also a doorway to the state and also federal government assets coming in.
Well, that brings us to a point in the show where we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about other disasters, things like the terrible tragedy we saw in Boston, and getting Walt Hubbard's take on that too. So don't go away, and we'll be right back.
Get ready.
If there's an earthquake
Or a terrorist act.
What about us?
We count on you.
Get the plan.
water,
Food.
ID tags.
Pet carrier.
a toy.
No plan. It's gonna be.
Now hop to it.
Don't delay. Don't try to wing it.
Use your mouth.
Prepare your pets for emergencies, whether you stay or evacuate. Go to 3days3ways.org and learn more.
Without a plan, we're sushi.
Welcome back to Disaster Zone, and if you're just joining us, today's show is a meeting with, interview with Walt Hubbard, Director of the King County Office of Emergency Management. Walt, why don't we pick up where we left off? And we said we'd come back, and the Boston event that happened some 12 years after 9/11. What are you and your staff, what'd you come away from analyzing that? The response that they had, or the threats we might have?
Yeah, Eric, even though we were talking earlier about things that may impact King County, what happens in Boston and other parts of the county, we're watching. And even though we talked about severe weather being and flooding being, I'm very grateful that early on, several years ago, the whole focus for emergency preparedness was on all hazards, which also included terrorism. I think Boston, as tragic as that was and as difficult as it was to watch, and the innocent folks that really were impacted there, I mean, it tells us that we need to be prepared for anything that happens. And whether that runs from personal preparedness up to the relationships that we have with our first responders who are going to be first on the scene and the support that we would provide them. So I think that Boston also says a lot about not only the dedication of first responders and all the folks in the public works, health department, medical personnel. It tells us once again, it reinforces us once again that plans and training and relationships that are developed and nurtured and tested prior to any event, and you never know when that may happen, are critically important. I also think it tells us a lot about our ability to collaborate and support each other in terms of communication. Messaging coming out of Boston to the public was really important. I mean, even beyond whether or not there was the law enforcement had any lead on who had done this, but we need to be really sensitive about the messaging going out to the public, and not only safety in terms of getting out of that area, of finding loved ones who may have been there that they saw earlier in the day that they weren't with them. So I think Boston tells us, reinforces the need for partnership. It tells us a lot about the training and plans that we need to have in place. They're only as good as us being able to put those in practice. And also how important it is to make sure that we've coordinated messaging out to the public to give them a sense of security and safety so they'll know and be able to make informed decisions.
Okay. And any thought on social media? Whether it's for Boston or we're seeing that tremendous push. We saw it certainly for the oil spill, for instance.
Yeah. Good question. Thanks for asking that. And you may have a different opinion about this from your perspective, but early on, I think that emergency management community was a little leery of, social media.
I think they still are sometimes.
I think now that it's something that we need to embrace, and you've been an advocate of that for a number of years, but that's something that we need to embrace. I mean, imagine the impact that we could have, and one quick example. Remember when power was lost in New York, and people were looking for places to be able to even charge their cell phones? There's information that emergency management coordinators and within even the jurisdictions in King County can provide to the public. And I think that we need to embrace that. We need to use it. You asked earlier about the youth movement that we have in the office and the digital comfort that they bring to us. I think it's a tool that we need to take full advantage of. And people rely on it. The mobility of and the speed of that information is something that we need to get in the path on and be an advocate for.
I think the region will look towards you, Walt, for some leadership on social media. So that's great to hear you're an advocate for it.
And also, just one last thing I'd like to say about that also, and that is really tied to the equity and social justice initiative that King County's been pushing over the last few years, especially since Executive Constantine has been there. We understand that the diversity of our community means we have to have different ways to communicate with folks. And social media gives us one way to do that. The FEMA interest and urge to be able to look at whole communities means that the diversity of our community is something that we need to embrace and figure out how to work best with. And that, I think that's indicative in what we've done in terms of language, communication. We're looking at organizations within the community to be able to talk to others in the community. Use of social media will be important for us in the future.
Yeah, another aspect, certainly the attacks on the World Trade Center and 9/11 and that, there was an infusion for almost 10 years of something like $3.2 billion a year going to state and local organizations, fire, police, emergency management. Those fundings are now less than half of what they were then. So what impact is that decrease in federal program funding having on your program itself?
There's been a long conversation over the past year or more within Washington State, looking at some emergency management performance grant funds that we know are getting fewer and tougher to get. And I think the realization of that has brought Washington State, it's not codified yet, but the state is moving there, to say, it may not be important to be able to have a program in each jurisdiction in the county or in the state. What's important is that residents have access to our services and our programs. And I think that is a broader, much more global way of looking at a reduction in resources, lack of resources coming in. You're absolutely right. After 9/11, there was this flush of money available, and folks were really looking at that to take advantage to beef up their capabilities. Those days are ending. We like to think of it as they've ended, and now we have to look down the road. So the regional mission that we've received from the King County Council, the lack of funding, the lack of capability of being able to provide that palette of services that jurisdictions in the past have been able to do, I think puts great emphasis on our ability to be able to look at how can we share resources. I've heard from some of the folks within the jurisdictions within King County who are looking at what the impact is going to be on their programs, and immediately they were I'm going to have to reduce services, reduce some of the contracts I have. I think there's going to be some shaving and some paring down of that. But at King County, we would like to have a conversation with our jurisdictions that says, you may not have to go there. I think we may have to compress and figure out how we can provide those services to the residents, but not necessarily immediately decide that everything's going to sort of,
Get smaller.
Yes, exactly. So I think we have some great opportunities, and it's always been the case, Eric. When we're under pressure here, the creativity of the folks committed to this endeavor in terms of emergency preparedness, I think is going to emerge. So we're trying to stimulate that conversation and get out front.
Okay, and that's good. There's other things going on at the national level with grants. But each discipline, whether it's fire, police, pre-hospital, hospital care, emergency management, had their own, I call it, stovepipe of funding coming to them. And the federal government proposed in 2013, that was rejected. The president had proposed and Congress rejected it because a lot of testimony from the various disciplines saying, no, we want our single stream of funding. That's being proposed again for 2014. What's your opinion how it should be? Where all the funds are combined, I call it a block grant perhaps, in one big pot, and then at the state level it's divvied out. What are you thinking about that?
Not surprised that they're looking at consolidating. We've seen that before. What that does, though, is going to put in immediately is going to increase the competition for those resources. Fewer resources, everyone's going to have to compete for that. In the past, if we can learn from that, and I think we're going to get the same sort of signal in the future, it will put a premium on those folks within the region, let's say King County, putting together a consolidated, collaborative plan for use of those funds. No longer are you going to be able to go out independently. You're going to have to be able to, I think, identify how this is going to provide better services, better emergency response and recovery, working with the stakeholders and partners within your jurisdiction. So I think it's going to add to the competition. It's going to require us to sharpen our request. It's going to put a premium on us being able to come together with our stakeholders to say, this is how we can impact our residents, our programs within King County, and we are sharing, we're sharing and collaborating in the services and the benefits that we hope to identify and bring to our residents. So I think it's going to increase competition, make us be more creative, and we're going to be able to, we're going to be forced to put together some requests that are going to indicate how we're going to be able to benefit from a lack of resources, but more people being impacted by it.
Okay, we're now about 2 minutes or under. Any last thought for our viewers? Your 30-second message to folks.
I think we can't emphasize this enough, that regardless of the plans and the training that we may put together in working with other assets within King County and the jurisdictions throughout King County and the counties that surround us, we become more resilient when we understand the value of the partnerships we have from the community level on up. I think we can't say enough about us being able to work together, to put some of our differences aside, to put maybe some of our parochial interests in terms of our particular jurisdictions aside. And I think it's it strengthens the quality of the partnership. So regardless of what we're going to be able to put down on paper, regardless of how many times we may train for a plan, it's going to be relationships that are going to be important in the future. Okay.
That's a great message to end on, Walt, especially for the county, which is sometimes a broker of the relationships in the region, and just wish you all the best in the future and to make our region as strong and as resilient as possible. And thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, appreciate it, Eric.
All right.
Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And for you folks at home, this brings us to the end of our show for today. Thanks for tuning in and learning more about what you and others can do to become better prepared for disasters. Remember, if you're going to get prepared, today is a good day to start. Have a great day, and bye-bye.